Hello everyone and welcome. Students often ask, what is IT service management? And then, what is IT infrastructure library? And the difference between them. They also ask, what is the relevance of each to modern IT? So to answer these and other questions, I'm going to provide an overview of how the requirement for ITSM emerged and then how ITIL was developed to meet that requirement. So the objectives of this presentation are to understand how the requirement for ITSM emerged and how it was driven and enhanced by IT and business changes. We will then look at how ITIL was developed to meet the ITSM requirement, and we will then finally discuss the continued relevance of both disciplines. Before moving on, it's essential to resolve a regular source of confusion, i.e. what is the difference between ITSM and ITIL. As you can see, ITSM refers to all of the activities required to deliver effective IT services to customers. ITIL is simply one possible way of doing so, by providing tools, methods, and process best practice to meet the ITSM requirement. You may not have heard of many or indeed any others, as ITIL is the solution in the widest global use and the most successful. So with these definitions on board, let's start our ITSM and ITIL journey at the beginning of business IT. Back in the 1950s, Lions Cake Company were, incredibly, the trailblazers for business computing with Leo, or the Lions Electronic Office, which was developed jointly with Cambridge University. Leo was used to administrate payroll and manage the logistics of tea shop deliveries. Leo was so successful that it rented processing time to big businesses such as the Ford Motor Company and Kodak, and also the Nuclear Research Establishment. Leo was all set to become the world's first business computer brand, until customers just couldn't quite equate trailblazing computing with a cake company. So IBM stepped in and the rest is history. For our story, however, the key things to note in this picture are that the only inputs are punch cards and paper tape. There is no networking and the only output device is a printer. The management of this facility all occurred within the confines of this room. So, computing, or IT, as we now commonly call it, was happening, but there was, as yet, no concept or consideration of IT services. Let's step forward to the 1970s then, and again, service management in the mainframe computing era was relatively easy to effect. Computer systems were characterized by large and expensive mainframes with processors that were accessed on-site only and ran very simple corporate applications like payroll and invoicing. There was minimal access for end users outside of the computer room via green screen, pre-formatted and lockdown inquiries only. In the 1980s, as a COBOL programmer, I worked on an ICL 1902T mainframe, which is now in the Science Museum, scarily, and inputs and outputs were still restricted to punch cards, paper tape and printouts respectively. If there was a fault, our resident ICL engineer, let's call him Joe, would emerge from his glass cubicle in the corner, pull out a screwdriver and an ammeter and fix it. Joe kept spares on site, and there was no concept of end users. Instead, each program was called a job. So e.g. run payroll, print pay slips, process invoices. Quality of service was a term yet unknown. So even now, with the provision of online inquiries and the introduction of some green screen service users, the management of services was still simple because it was in-house and self-contained. In this slide, you see the typical mainframe architecture. Consider how much easier this type of system would be to manage versus today's complex enterprise networks. The red blocks represent the physical wall wrapped around the mainframe, which mean that, taking each point in turn, security was easy to manage as the mainframe was in a secure operations area behind locked doors and access via security staff. Support, i.e. incident management, was provided on site by Joe. Quality of service was not an issue, as there were no end users, but rather just jobs. Interoperability was not a requirement. The mainframe environments were self-contained. No end users, so no requirement to manage their expectations. Change management was limited to manufacturers' changes and local implementation, as and when. Configuration management was simple, as all the assets were in one room, and standards less of an issue as each site was independent and not interoperable. Let's move on to the 1980s then. As you can see, we've now broken out of the cosy mainframe room into a distributed environment with a focus on application and other services for end users rather than traditional batch jobs. This had implications for many of the old mainframe activities, such as incident management and problem management could no longer rely on Joe, but instead required coherent processes and functions, such as service desks and support teams. Change management was no longer at the whim of a supplier. Rather, all stakeholders across IT in the business would need to be involved in impact assessments and approvals. Configurations could no longer be managed locally when systems relied on thousands of assets and relationships to be maintained across a widely dispersed geographical base. End users also now came to the fore, and the focus moved on to ensuring that services were delivered to the quality of service agreed with the end user, so an entire new discipline called service level management was born. As you will appreciate, one of the significant changes surrounded security, which had been so easy to manage in the past. In the new world, all devices and servers were interconnected and potential targets, so security became a significant issue. So, this IT service explosion, outside of controlled environments, is what really drove the demand for some way of managing global, user-focused IT services, and so the requirement for IT service management was crystallized and required action. A reasonable analogy is that of motoring, which was introduced into Great Britain in 1895, but with only 15 cars on the roads. By 1914, there were thousands of cars, but again, so few that motoring was considered self-managing and independent, a bit like our old mainframe environments. However, by 1931, there were 2.3 million vehicles on the roads and 7,000 fatalities, prompting the government to finally publish a framework of information, tools and processes called the Highway Code, articulating best practice for the actual highway. The IT service management requirement put into focus the need for similar best practice for the information highway. The ITIL concept therefore emerged in the 1980s when the British Government Cabinet Office and the Central Computer and Telecommunications Agency (CCTA) was tasked with developing an ITSM framework for efficient and financially responsible use of IT resources within the British government and the private sector. ITIL was the solution which was developed, and the CCTA took the wise decision to give it away to encourage wider adoption. Large companies and government agencies adopted the framework very quickly, and as it grew in popularity both in the UK and across the world, IT itself changed and evolved, and so did ITIL, until version 3 was released in 2011. ITIL is a best practice framework that is used industry-wide. It's consistent with ISO 20000, the standard of IT service management, but is not a standard itself. The wheel diagram illustrates the ITIL framework, which gives guidance and direction regarding the application of service management. The ITIL core refers to the 5 publications of service strategy, service design, service transition, service operation, and continual service improvement, which we will discuss in more detail in later lectures. Let's now step into the complex IT configurations of today, when we use the internet as a communications bearer for businesses, exploit cloud services, and even facilitate bring your own device. Without the ITSM and ITIL foundations in place, this routine introduction of novel services and evolution of mainstream services would not have been managed so coherently. Organizations and businesses are almost completely reliant upon IT, and need great IT solutions that give them what they need, when they need it, and in the right form and volume, and to the agreed quality of service. ITSM, and specifically ITIL, are the glue that enables this to happen. In summary then, ITIL is hugely prevalent and successful. It is the most widely used ITSM framework and employed by most government departments, top universities, US and UK military, and leading companies such as HP, Walmart, BP, and even Walt Disney, who apply ITIL principles right across their customer service activities and not just within their IT operations. Although COBIT, Control Objectives for Information Related Technologies, is sometimes proposed as a rival to ITIL, it is in fact complementary, and in that it focuses on high-level governance of IT, the what, as opposed to the ITIL how. After 30 plus years of success, it is reasonable to expect that the ITIL framework will carry on being usefully exploited and gradually evolve even more over the next 30 years and continue to be seen as a rare success in British government IT policy.